Welcome everybody to this World Satsanga held on Saturday the 22nd of December 2018 in association with Kevin Moore and The Moore Show. And as usual, I thank Kevin for his hard work and diligence in spreading the word of the greater reality in the way he's doing it by using his various different mediums of The Moore Show and More Talk, and of course his YouTube video log as well. Thank you, Kevin. You're a great asset to mankind. So, what are we going to do today? This is the last Satsanga of 2018, and the years seem to go very, very quickly, don't they? It's really fast this year, really fast. Okay, we can talk about time later, maybe in another Satsanga, but right now, let's have a look at what we've got on the agenda for this year. Okay, or in fact this month. Okay, so 50 minutes talk on what is Christ consciousness. Okay, then we've got a bunch of questions that were submitted by those wonderful individuals who both listen to the Satsanga and offer a few questions that are relevant to themselves, but also relevant to the rest of everybody on this planet who is a truth seeker. And then we're going to do an end of meet meditation, which is to link everybody in to be in Satsanga. Now, Satsanga is an Indian word, a Hindu word, clearly, and it should be split into two, really, Sat and Sanga, because Sat means sort of God, or God consciousness, or God presence, and Sanga means together. And so to be in Satsanga means that we're together in God, or together in God's presence or Source's presence. And so the objective of this meditation is to put us all within the energies associated with God, okay, or the Source, okay, or even the origin. And I'll stop saying okay now. Right, let's look at the object of today's talk. What is Christ consciousness? Well, Christ consciousness is, in essence, the ability to be linked in with the greater reality, what that being one's true energetic self, or Godhead, or Oversoul, or higher self, whichever you want to call it, the Source, and maybe the origin. And it really is a case of also being in Samadhi. Samadhi is again a Hindu word which explains the same thing. It's being in Samadhi whilst being in meditation is the same as being in Christ consciousness, is the same as being in contact with Source, or being in continual Satsanga, so to speak. Although from an individual perspective, although whilst you're in Satsanga, you're not individualized, you are part of the greater reality. You are linked in with everybody and everything continuously whilst in communion with Source, or God, or Sat. So Christ is a way of saying Christend. And a way of saying Christend is to understand that it means to be purized. Now, in the old days, when Jesus was on the planet, and before then, when the wonderful being who is recognised as being John the Baptist was purifying people, he was bathing them from a metaphoric perspective in a body of water, usually a river or something, or a lake or a pond, and the objective being that he had removed their sins. In that instance, it would be a way of releasing karma, or him taking their karma on board to raise their frequencies so that they were able to communicate with Source, or be more capable of working with the functions of higher frequencies from an elevated perspective, allowing them to see what they could achieve and be before they actually got to that point, through hard, diligent work, meditation, and eating the right foods and being of service in the right ways. So to be Christend really meant to be purified to the point where one starts again, has a fresh page in life, a fresh page in their particular existence, and therefore can move on and progress in a really positive and meaningful way, whilst being in service to others, and service to self, service to God, and understand through meditation, through being of service, that this raises one's frequencies and allows one to achieve the different functions associated with higher frequency work and to continue to go upwards. So Christ consciousness is a position of purity, not just of the individual's energies and frequencies, that removes things like karma or karmic links, or those desires to have thoughts, behaviours and actions, status, material, wealth, control over others, etc. That's part of this addiction to being in the gross physical aspects of the multiverse, and allow that person to move beyond the physical and navigate through incarnation without becoming addicted to it, or any of those little things that we do get drawn to whilst incarnate. And so Christ consciousness is about being purified, and the consciousness side of it, if we separate out the Christening to the consciousness, is really about the purity of thought associated with it. And because you're a higher frequency, you're moving into the ability to, through purity, communicating with source, communicating with one's true energetic self, which is of course an individualized, smaller version of source, and the incarnate aspect or soul, or even a shard, becomes a individualized piece of sentient energy that's associated with the aspect, or with the shard's case, with the shard's case, or with the aspect or soul's or source aspect or soul's case. I'll get my teeth back in a moment. Then that's associated with the true energetic self. So we have all of these different things that are, if you like, layers of consciousness that we can go to. The Christ and consciousness being purized to the point where we can work with that which is higher than us. If we're a shard, and there are some shards that can achieve this, but most don't, because they tend to be fully immersed in their incarnation, would be able to communicate with this aspect, and the aspect will be able to communicate with its true energetic self. And the true energetic self, being where it is normally in communication with source anyway, because it's always in the energetic, or even though it's in a, shall we say, a smaller or lower function of that which is source, because it's part of the multiverse and because it's an individualized unit of source sentience, so to speak. And of course the origin, having separated that smaller version to itself, created our source entity as well. So everything has a position based upon the level of sentience and the energy supporting that sentience and the division of that sentience and sentient energy. So if you want to call it, the level of Christ consciousness increases depending upon the frequency that you're in, and whether you're in a purely energetic state or a state of communion within the source, or whether as a source you would be outside of that, outside of your own work and in communion with origin as well. Although of course heightened levels of communion or connectivity or Christ consciousness means that an aspect could and will be able to communicate with origin as well as source. But this takes a specifically shall I say, focused level of personal work that allows that individual to, even though they can navigate through and work with those individuals who are of lower frequency, have the ability to communicate on a higher frequency level, and therefore continue this evolutionary progression that they've got themselves moving upwards. So lots of words there, lots of thoughts about what Christ consciousness is, but really it's about being in communication with one's higher self, true energetic self, Godhead or oversoul, and source and origin. Not necessarily all at the same time, because those steps can be progressive, but the level of Christ consciousness one has is increased depending upon the level that one can communicate to. So if one's just communicating to the true energetic self, that's a level of Christ consciousness that they've reached. If they're able to communicate whilst incarnate with source, that's a higher level of Christ consciousness they've reached. If they're able to communicate with origin whilst incarnate, that's an even higher level of Christ consciousness whilst incarnate. And so it's the level of purity and the frequencies exposed by that level of purity that create an understanding of what level of Christ consciousness a particular incarnate aspect has achieved. Well, I hope that helps. A little bit wordy, probably a little bit too quick in speech sometimes, but that's because I'm very interested in, of course, the subject matter. If anybody wants to ask questions about the Christ consciousness, or any other specific questions related to a particular aspect of Christ consciousness that they feel is interesting, then please do email me. You can do it through the website. You can get in contact with me through the website, and that'll help you to move forwards. Those individuals who have the World Satsanga distributed to them via email, they can communicate through the normal email routes. And those of you who only get access via the website, once you've made a communication via the website, you would normally be able to communicate directly anyway. Okay, so let's have a look at. I promised I wouldn't say it okay again, didn't I? Right, so let's look at these questions then. This is another series of questions from FN. And there's one particular question towards the bottom that I think is quite poignant, I think, and one that needs to be broadcast to everybody, not just a private question between me and another person. That means that things aren't particularly open. I don't particularly want to say that I'm limiting the type of questions that people ask of me to just that person, because it's important that everybody knows these questions. So let's look at these first 6 questions then. First one is from FN again. What do you mean when you wrote that those tests that enter into the evolutionary cycle at the start of the multiversal evolutionary cycle can and do elect to use aspects of themselves as smaller individualized guides as a way of achieving their own progression in an accelerated way whilst being outside of the evolutionary cycle themselves? Do I mean that a true energetic self can have an aspect as incarnate in the evolutionary cycle and an aspect as individualized guides, meaning having 2 roles? I don't understand. I thought you said to be a guide, the test is completely inconvenient and becomes a guide or master guide, and there is no aspects in the incarnate evolutionary cycle that the test must have reached in its own evolutionary cycle already to be a guide. Well, at the start of an evolutionary cycle, that being when a source entity, let's focus on our source entity, populates an area of energy and structure of the origin with its sentience. So then its sentience given a body of energy, or commandeering a body of energy. It then decides what to do with that level of connectivity with origin. Does it create an environment within itself? Does it make smaller units of itself? Does it not do any of that? Does it just sit there and think about how it's going to work? Does it just investigate those parts of the source, the origin itself on its own, or does it create something that is going to challenge it or challenge parts of it? So in our particular source's instance, when it started a new evolutionary cycle and it created this condition where half of itself was split out into a structure, of which isn't all of its structure but is a vast majority of it, to allow other smaller individualized units of itself that it created to investigate that other area. It then gave those true energetic selves, because that's what it created first, the opportunity of entering into an evolutionary cycle themselves, becoming part of the understanding of the structure of the multiverse through individualized investigation, or to help those who are going into the evolutionary cycle by being guides. In that instance, they would need to understand the possibilities associated with what can be interacted with and integrated within that environment. And so the aspects themselves aren't created as such then, they are simply true energetic selves. But it is possible, in very rare conditions, where a true energetic self may elect to have a little part of itself become part of the evolutionary cycle, but generally on a temporary basis. Now, it's quite normal for the true energetic self to become specialised in guidance, or just specialised in the evolutionary cycle. And in general, this is the case. And there are times when a true energetic self may project a small part of itself, an aspect, into the evolutionary cycle, and it stays there for a period of time, just to see what's happening and how it works and how its own work is received. So, in general, they don't mix and match, but there are cases where guides become temporarily associated with the evolutionary cycle, or where a guide may change into the evolutionary cycle, or where, in very rare cases, an incarnate entity or TESS moves out of the evolutionary cycle to become a guide. Now, this requires a significant level of progression on behalf of the true energetic self to go from the evolutionary cycle into the service part of things. And on the other side, it's really not detrimental for a true energetic self to have itself or part of itself to move out of the service by being a guide to those who are in the evolutionary cycle, to become part of the evolutionary cycle. So it's the TESS in this instance can temporarily, it's very, very rare, but they can, if they wish, temporarily project a part of themselves into the evolutionary cycle, whilst most of it, for instance, can be still working in this service industry, so to speak, of being a guide. And so it's very difficult sometimes for people to understand that a true energetic self that is in the service side of things, that's a guide or master guide, can still project part of itself into the evolutionary cycle, and that evolutionary cycle doesn't affect it. So it's usually a temporary thing, though, as I just stated. It's not something they would do, and that aspect would have to continue through the evolutionary cycle for the rest of the total evolutionary cycle. They may dip into it and dip out of it, and so in essence, it's all really about does that true energetic self want to experience something because it wants to understand how those incarnate aspects that are in the evolutionary cycle are experiencing things, and so it gets a better understanding of how to advise or direct or lead or guide those aspects or true energetic selves that are in the evolutionary cycle whilst they're in the evolutionary cycle. It's a bit like how can you guide somebody to do something if you've not experienced it yourself? And so sometimes the guides will project part of themselves into the evolutionary cycle temporarily, just to understand how the interaction with them is on that level that they're working on. And by achieving this and understanding and experiencing this, they can then improve the way they communicate with their wards, those other aspects and of true energetic selves that are in the evolutionary cycle, so that they can make their incarnation more efficient. Well, I hope that answered that question. It's a bit long-winded, but that's the way it happens sometimes. Okay, next question, question 2. With reference to aspiring guides, you wrote, or are true energetic selves that are allowing their aspects to remain in a projected state to enter into service as individual aspects. That's in Kindle, page 3739. What does this mean? To allow their aspect to remain in a projected state? I thought you said that to be a guide, you don't have to be an individual aspect incarnated in the evolutionary cycle, and the whole true energetic self with all its aspects must become guides. Again, this is also somewhat temporary, if you want to call it that. So the temporary part of it really is to do with allowing an aspect to continue its work until it's finished. So if there are aspects that are in a projected state that are experiencing the evolutionary cycle, and the test decides, or the true energetic self decides, it wants to move into being of service, because it's evolved to that point where it can do, then simply it can start to work on becoming a guide, being outside of the evolutionary cycle whilst part of it still is. It's very difficult for us as human beings to understand how something can be one thing and still be something else. But they can, and although in essence and in general and most of the time a true energetic self will be totally outside of the evolutionary cycle, there are times when they do delve into it, or times when, if they've moved from the evolutionary cycle into the service side of things by being a guide, that if they've reached this level of progression where they are in a position where they can move, even if there's a small part of themselves, like an aspect or a shard, that is still in the evolutionary cycle, they can still allow that to be there, to continue its work, and then come back into communion, so to speak. But just remember that all this is linear understanding, and although from a linear perspective this would appear to be so, i.e. the true energetic self goes into the service side outside of the evolutionary cycle and leaves part of itself there, and that may take a period of a number of events, so to speak, to allow that particular aspect to continue that work in the evolutionary cycle, that because everything exists concurrently, it's already happened. So even though it appears to be linear and the one thing is happening before another, or one thing appears to be out of synchronization with something else, because everything happens concurrently anyway, it's already happened. So even thinking about this issue about a true energetic self is going into service but leaving part of itself behind, it's already done that work and come back into communion with that true energetic self. So it's not a case of how many lives has it got to do, how many incarnations has it got to do before it can go back into the true energetic self, and will that part of the true energetic self be not able to be part of the true energetic self because the rest of it's in service? It doesn't happen that way. Everything happens concurrently. We think in linear terms and think that things happen separately and in an individualized way, but it's not quite the case. Things can happen all at the same time and do happen all at the same time. It's just that we can't understand it. Good. Right, next question referenced a Tess places 30% in an aspect that is incarnated. Okay, I don't think it's quite right. Let me read it out first and then I'll come back to the question. A Tess places 30% in an incarnate aspect that is incarnated. You wrote that the aspect could manipulate frequencies above the eighth dimensions, with some minor ability in the 6th and 7th. What did you mean when you said, so the aspect sentience and its associated energies are both in the primary incarnation and the secondary incarnation? Oh, I think it's not dimensions, I'm thinking it's frequencies that the questioner is referring to, not dimensions. So the aspect sentience and its associated energies are both in the primary incarnation and the secondary incarnation, which are both controlled directly by the aspect. Are you referring to the test? What do you mean here? Right. I don't think this has been understood at all. The test can place up to 30% of its sentience into any one or all of those aspects which it projects. So there must be 70% left to allow it to function correctly. That 30% can be administered into one particular true aspect, or distributed amongst 12 aspects. So that would be 2.5% of its sentience in each aspect if it was 12 aspects. But it can only project 4 aspects and therefore give 7.5% into each aspect. So that allows the chances of these entities to become more functional naturally whilst incarnate if they had more than 2.5%. So, but an aspect that is has more percentage of sentience and that's in a higher frequency could, in effect, allow itself to be in 2 places at once. And this is where we get the primary and secondary incarnation from, where an aspect that's normally or has incarnated into a higher frequency will move some of its sentience out from that primary incarnation into a secondary incarnation, which could be a lower frequency within the structure of this particular universe. So it could be within a human body, it could be within another body that is at the same frequency or slightly lower frequency. So that means that aspect sentience then is associated with the primary incarnation and the secondary incarnation. So if there is, for instance, 7.5% of the sentience associated with the primary incarnation, potentially it could leave 0.75% of that sentience in the primary incarnation to allow that primary incarnation to just continue on tick over whilst the rest of it is in another incarnation. Or it could leave 2.5% in there, or it could leave 5% in there and then project 2.5% into lower frequency. So it's basically about understanding the ways in which a true energetic self could distribute the sentience into an aspect, and how that aspect, if it incarnates into a higher frequency within the physical universe, could distribute that sentience willingly and under its own volition, so to speak, to allow it to experience multiple, in this instance 2 locations concurrently and outside of this normal generation of different realities or event spaces as a result of event space having exposure to a decision process that we would create. Okay, so I hope that explains that, because it's quite a difficult thing to add to. There's a number of different parts of that question that don't quite link into each other. Okay, next question, number 4. Sympathetic souls. I wrote that also be aware that the work of the aspects undertaken in the pre-incarnation stage can also create a certain level of recognition, even if the aspects have not incarnated together before, which is on Kindle page 3941. What do you mean by work the aspects undertaken in the pre-incarnation stage? Do different aspects of different tesses meet up together before incarnation regarding the life plan? And this is what you're referring to. Absolutely, that is correct. In effect, sympathetic souls become sympathetic souls because they've worked together before in an incarnate state, or if they haven't worked together before, they've worked together to satisfy the requirements of their life plans individually, and where they have to interact with each other for a specific period or specific number of events whilst incarnate, and so they recognise each other's energetic signature, even if they don't recognise them physically. And so it's a bit of a subconscious thing when one is incarnate in lower frequencies, because you think, oh, I recognise that person. You've never met them before, but you do recognise them. You don't recognise the person, the human body, you recognise the energies, the energetic signature. And so irrespective of whether you worked with that individual before in another incarnation, or it's just about making sure that you link in together in this incarnation to do some work or to share something or to assist in each other's evolutionary progression, again you know that individual and you get drawn towards them. So that's what a sympathetic soul is, and it's about recognising the energetic signature, which we do on an intuitive basis rather than a logical basis. Okay, next question. Excuse me. Please clarify on Kindle 3999. You first refer to any of the versions of the incarnate aspect that are created as a result of the creation of additional event space. You went on to say that in essence, the aspect that has the capability of experiencing the event spaces whilst controlling its own event space of other versions of itself will benefit, as will its primary aspect and tests, from its ability to experience parallel existences by accruing the evolutionary content associated with these experiences and the evolutionary content associated with the ability to experience them concurrently rather than linearly. I think it explains itself, actually. Let's see if I can work out another way of saying it. In effect, if an aspect is of a high enough frequency, or through its own personal work, or it comes into an incarnation with a different level of frequency, like some of the rainbow, indigo and crystal children, or the hybrids of those children do, then they will be able to link into different event spaces, link into different realities, and link into those, sometimes link into the different aspects that are part of their tests. And so you get a number of different ways in which they can experience things. Now, in the events that they don't understand what's going on, we can get some forms of psychosis appearing where people can't work out why they're seeing things around them that other people can't, or why they're communicating with different entities and other people can't. And so they start to lose a grip of themselves and their ability to navigate through this particular incarnation, because everything they're receiving is contradictory to that which they're being told by those around them. So that becomes difficult, and in fact that those around them don't understand them in the first place, and so they label them as being psychotic in some way, shape or form. So it's very interesting to note that when this happens, unless there is somebody there who can say, right, this is what's happening to you, because they can log into them and they can see the connections between the frequencies, the abilities associated with those frequencies, or functions associated with those frequencies, and the disassociation between everybody else around them, then that individual won't know that what they're experiencing is real. They'll just not be able to relate to it at all, and those individuals won't be able to help them. So once you get somebody who says, okay, this is what's going on, it's real, and gives them some way of training themselves so that they can turn it on and turn it off and give themselves a rest, or they're able to navigate through it so they don't turn it off, but they're able to understand where to focus their consciousness or their sentience at any one point in space, so to speak, and I'm going to say time in this instance, so that they can communicate in a rational and regular and robust way in this particular environment. And if they find their consciousness wanders to, or sentience wanders to another event space that they're experiencing, they can also work that out as well. So in essence, they could, if they wanted to, communicate with themselves in different event spaces and understand and experience those different event spaces that have been created through their decision processes, where the particular focus of this sentience that is with them here now is focused here, but the other potential focuses are also available to them as well. So in this instance, the ability to experience these things, recognize that they're in different event spaces and different realities, and work with those concurrently, allows that aspect to not only navigate through the greater reality whilst incarnate, but also evolve at a rapid pace as well, because they're stretching themselves beyond the localized and singularized event space that they are focused upon. So it's a big thing. In fact, I seem to remember at some point in the past, I'm going to refer to Star Trek now, where Q was testing Picard, and he was throwing him into different realities or different event spaces, and to see how expansive he was, and he was trying to see if he could link up what was being experienced by him in these different event spaces, and work with them and know that there were different event spaces, and allow them to all to link together as one concurrent event space, although they're still individualized. And so this is a similar sort of thing, thinking about it. And I didn't realize that Star Trek was so good at sometimes at identifying how we can exist in and work in a general sense. But that's a good example. I can't remember what the episode is now. It was a long time ago, but I've no doubt if you search the internet and look for this episode where Q is testing Picard and they're being he's in different realities or different event spaces, and the objective is for his perpetuated existence, because Q, I think, was going to dissolve him or something, or destroy him, or destroy the Enterprise, was if he could work in multiple realities concurrently and work and stitch them together. And that's what he was doing. There was something there that was concurrent in all those different realities, so that helped that he could use as a link to link them all together. Well, I hope that explains that particular answer to that question. But the answer is, once we can start to work with these things concurrently, we can experience everything. Every decision we make, the way we've gone one way rather than another way, we can all experience concurrently. And being expansive enough to be able to use that and navigate around it does definitely accelerate one's evolution. Okay, the last question here is actually quite, I suppose you could call it quite personal actually, but I don't see things in that way. I see it as being a level of understanding that needs to be accrued. So in this question, he said, in the Origin Speaks, you wrote that the Origin said that you were the only incarnated, and that you even have a chapter on being Maverick. In your recent book, The An Dialogues, Anne says that there was another and that you were not told about. I find it troubling to know that Origin misled you. There is a difference between omission and misleading, and while I understand that sometimes we are not told things for our evolutionary growth, Origin could have easily responded in 100 different ways to I suppose, relieve that. It kind of invalidated it kind of invalidates us how much of what we read is accurate and how much is just fiction and being led to believe things. Why would Origin misinform? Going over that book, the issue was discussed in details and there was no ambiguity. So is it okay to not be truthful if we do not want to tell the truth? Everything seems like a game. Origin misleading, not in brackets, not omission, but plainly misled. It cannot come from a high vibration. Well, we've actually discussed this together in a reading as it happens, but in effect the other was Anne, and there's another hybrid that I'm working with as well at the moment. Now the issue is here that it wasn't that I was the only incarnate. I think the words need to be more accurate. My Tess is the only that is incarnating from a pure perspective, and so it didn't specifically mislead. I think it was economical with the truth, because when we as human beings get information that is, shall we say, sometimes too much too soon, then we get distracted by it. It's a bit like the moth being attracted to the light of the fire and then getting burnt. And so it was only when I started to communicate with Anne from the energetic perspective, when she had transitioned back into the energetic, that it was then felt relevant on being advised to advise me that there was another and that was Anne. There are other hybrid on the planet, quite clearly. There's lots of them that are here, but in terms of the pure there is only one test that is incarnated, and that is the test that has allowed its smaller aspect of itself to experience being in this particular body called Guy. Another aspect of it was Anne, and so it's not really misleading. It's being economical, I see, and I think that's also sometimes we're allowed to have a little bit of encouragement to allow us to move forwards. Because if you think about it from a human perspective, if you're experiencing something and sort of being special is part of that motivating force to allow you to move forwards and continue with it, then why would you destroy that feeling of being special? Because if you destroyed it, you would potentially, in my instance, if there's another why don't they get on with it? Why don't they face the ridicule that I sometimes face when people disagree or think we're crazy or bonkers or mad? Why would I want to experience that in a public arena when somebody else can do it? So if I was being told at the wrong time that there was another and that it was part of the original true energetic self, I think I would have probably said, okay, let's let Anne do it, or somebody else do it, rather than me. Because sometimes the sort of feedback that we get whilst being in the public arena and putting ourselves on a not on a pedestal really, but in the firing line, putting the head above the trenches, is sometimes very difficult. And I don't think there's any spiritual leader or spiritual guidance individual or somebody who's trying to expose the truth for the benefit of others has never experienced. I don't think there's anybody who in those positions has ever experienced, the purity of people saying, "Oh, yes, you're right." All of them have experienced some form of animosity, and looking back in my whole life, every time I've been working on some of the information, even as a school person, school child, a teenager, I can remember people listening to what I've been saying, because I was intuiting information, channeling information even then, not knowing it, of course. The people were ridiculing the information, ridiculing me in a public arena at the schools and things. And other spiritual people have also experienced that when they're dealing with the truth. And so, it's like everything else. It's power in numbers, and if you're on your own, you've got no power at all. Not that you should have power over those numbers, but it does sort of show us that, in essence, it's sometimes if we're given information that somebody else is capable of doing the work, we'll let them do it. Specifically, if we're being hurt. So I'm not surprised that that information was not specifically being misled from me, but sort of being withheld for a period. And maybe even thinking about it, if I understood the level of what Anne was before she was disincarnated, maybe it would have changed the dynamic of the work between us, and maybe it would have got to the point where I'm not doing what I'm doing now. So there are things that Origin knows and Source knows that are sometimes being counter to what we consider to be the truth, that is the real truth, that is being not so much being hidden from us, but we're not being exposed to because it's not the right time to be exposed to it. And that's my understanding of that. Well, I hope that answers that question. It's a bit difficult to explain sometimes when you know it's the truth, but you also know that the truth is the truth as well. Sometimes everything is the truth concurrently. That's the way to think about it. Next question from US, that lovely lady who's doing the transcripts for us. This is, and this was sent to me whilst I was travelling. I was travelling in China, and I've only recently come back, to be honest. So here's an interesting question for your upcoming December Satsanga. I know you're travelling, so please let me know if you've received it. Well, I did. Interestingly enough, the firewalls in China are getting stronger at the moment, so some things weren't getting through. So a lot of the time I use a VPN to get through, and I think sometimes the VPNs are being caught as well these days, irrespective of where you are in the world, because software is getting better at discovering that somebody's IP address is not exactly where they are. Question: we now have entered the age of genetically engineered designer babies in China, where scientists used a gene editing technology called CRISPR to modify a human embryo in vitro to make it resistant to infections such as HIV, smallpox and cholera. Apparently genetic resistance to HIV is common in parts of northern Europe, but not found in China. The scientists see this as a new form of medicine and can eliminate genetic diseases, e.g. Alzheimer's, heart disease, some cancers or infections, and can enhance the baby's IQ or other features. But other people question the ethics of genetically tailored humans, which could become a new form of eugenics. What are my thoughts on these technologies to be used in fetuses and adults? Is human evolution meant to be shaped by this kind of science, in addition to naturally occurring Darwinian evolution? Where are we headed with this? We all want to know. Well, if you look back a few civilizations ago, you will understand that the Atlanteans also were very, very masterful in manipulating the genome. The issue is that they started to manipulate it in ways that were not specifically pure, and that were there for mainly, I suppose, fashionable and status reasons. But nevertheless, they could do the sort of things that this question is asking now. And personally, I don't see an issue with it. Energetically, it is. I'm just asking the question. Energetically, it doesn't matter to the aspect or the shard that incarnates into a body that is being created either as a from a test tube or from in vitro work, whether or not there's a genome associated with it that's been manipulated. At the end of the day, it's a vehicle to incarnate into, and so our aspects or shards from the aspect aren't really interested in that. All they're interested in is, will that particular vehicle allow them to be able to experience what they want to experience in a particular incarnation associated with the goals that they've identified in their life plan. So if the genetic manipulation means that it's able to experience certain forms of longevity or certain types of abilities, and that links into their life plan, then it's fine. If it doesn't, then maybe they won't choose to incarnate into that particular vehicle. So it's not an issue really, it's a matter of choice. The aspect or shard will choose whether to incarnate into a body that's been genetically manipulated or not, as the case may be, depending upon what they need to achieve or experience in this particular incarnation. So, and also from our perspective, if we are supposed to incarnate into a vehicle in this environment and experience this environment in the way it's supposed to be experienced, then, and all of the bodies that are here are manipulated in some way, shape or form, because they all are. We have medicines, inoculations, we have operations, we have different dietary things. So all of this creates a form of manipulation of some sort, and we're happy with that. It's just that some subject matters appear to be more of a concern than others. So at the end of the day, we as incarnate human beings can't see anything else other than the human side of things. We can't see what a true energetic self or an aspect or a shard sees when it's disincarnate, and the opportunities associated with a particular incarnation by incarnating into a body or a vehicle that is enhanced in some way, modified in other ways, or is capable of experiencing different levels of physicality in other ways as well, or is resistant to certain diseases as well. It doesn't matter to them. It's the same as us buying a new car. Has our car got more electronic gadgets than the other car? Yeah. Is it able to do cruise control, autonomous cruise control, or does it not have cruise control? And so we start to understand that it's, from our perspective, we choose to drive a car based upon our financial capabilities and what we're comfortable with, and that's the same with the aspect when it incarnates. If the body's been genetically manipulated, does it benefit the aspect? If it does, great, it will incarnate into it. If it doesn't benefit it and it doesn't give it the ability to experience its life plan the way it wants to experience it won't incarnate into it. I think it's as simple as that. In fact, I'm being told it's as simple as that. I'm not thinking, I'm being told. But thank you anyway, it's great. That's a good question. Next question from EM. Very simple question, but with with a potentially massive answer. How do we best serve? I'm anticipating that this depends upon what level you are. Every level has its own service. And there's a comment here. Your teachings continue to resonate very high. I appreciate you being here and transmitting to all of us who are listening. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm not sure I'll leave that line in the transcript, but it's not important, I don't think. But thank you anyway. I don't need to be thanked for doing this work. It's a pleasure to be of service in this way. So, referring to the question now, how do we best serve? The answer to that question is it's to the best of your ability. And it's as simple as that, I feel. Doing what you can do for the benefit of others without requiring reward of any way, shape or form, either monetarily, materially, or spoken rewards, is the best way to serve. Serve when requested rather than trying to force service onto others. That's the best way to serve. Do the best of your ability for individuals when asked to serve, and serve yourself by thinking, behaving and acting in higher frequency ways. And that is the best way to move forwards in terms of service. Serve God, and in doing the best job you can in what you do, whether it's your career, whether it's your interaction with your family, your friends, loved ones, or your career. Everything you do the best you can. Don't do a half job. Just think of it, everything you're doing is you're doing to experience the best type of experience, the best level of experience you can do. And knowing that that experience in its purity and its effectiveness is being passed on to your true energetic self, and is also being passed on to Source as an enhanced level of interaction with that which it has presented for us to interact with. Okay, well, thank you. I think that's a good question, that is. But the most important thing is, don't force your service on others. If you're asked, then serve when you can do. And sometimes, even if there are times, mind you, when we're asked to serve, but we know our service won't benefit the individuals, because the whole point of their experience is that they sort things out themselves. So if we do give service to people who don't really need it or shouldn't have it, they don't focus on sorting themselves out, and they put all their issues onto yourself, and then remove their own responsibilities from sorting themselves out, and then dump it onto you. So you have to be very careful how you work with people. Sometimes they need to be responsible for their own incarnation and what they're experiencing, and not release that responsibility onto you. So being of service is very. You have to be careful how you are with service with people sometimes, and sometimes you may have to detach from somebody and then reattach later. And again, how you do that is best felt and thought about, and you need to meditate on it, on how to re-interact or continue the lack of interaction. If you're being requested to be of service, but you feel that particular service isn't being beneficial to that individual, because it's removing their ability to work on themselves. Okay, good question, actually, good questions. Next question, the last question actually, is from DC, and it says, here's a question for the next meeting. How is the energetic like the physical? For example, are there famous people, souls, entities, sentience? Are there vacations, entertainment, travel to see different things? Do we have some best friends we hang on to or hang around with? Is there a history that we all agree upon in the energetic? Some of the stories we have been fed throughout history about the energetic stroke heaven, sitting around eating, consuming heavily bonbons, do not ring true, however. There might be some truth to the stories that we have been told. Okay, that's the first question. There's another question below. My understanding is that we are all equal, and we are all in recognition of our connectivity with our true energetic self and with Source, with relationship to what we've experienced and how we've evolved, in on behalf of our true energetic self, and how our true energetic self has evolved on behalf of Source. And so there's no sort of fame, so to speak. There's no entertainment, so to speak, or travel to see different things. But we do sort of gravitate towards sort of our aspect, so to speak, and aspects. Our true energetic self, and some of those aspects that are part of our true energetic self that are within that collective we sometimes call the soul group. And so we do have, aspects of sentience that we do prefer to be with, because they're part of our soul group. We do also have other aspects of sentience of other true and energetic selves that are
individuals that we have worked with in previous incarnations, for instance, that we will relate to from an incarnate perspective. And it's not so much that we would sort of hang out with them, so to speak. We would work with them to understand what we're doing next if we're deciding to work with them in another incarnation, and how that might benefit them and us and others who we interact with as a function of that particular incarnation. And also how does it affect us from a parallel perspective. And so really it's a case of we're all in communion, and that's the best way to say it. We're either in various different forms of individualized communion or in full communion. And our true energetic self only enters into full communion when it's finished the evolutionary cycle. And so we communicate with those other aspects that are individualized whilst being in communion. In the 5 or so different ways of that, but the full communion we probably wouldn't, because we're in full communion with our true energetic self, and therefore we are our true energetic self rather than an individualized function of it. So it's really a case of just being in communion and being together from a full communion perspective or an individualized perspective. And the rest of the work is really about understanding how we're going to experience, how we're going to evolve, or how we have experienced and how we've evolved. So the life plan is the creation of how we can experience, and the life review is what we've experienced and how we've evolved, and how our guides and helpers have evolved as a consequence, although they're not in the evolutionary cycle, but how they've progressed as a function of working with us as well, and how they've benefited from working with us, and how they've learned how to increase the efficiency of their guidance as well. So it's not like being on Earth at all, although we can and do at times, if we are struggling on detaching ourselves from our incarnation, do create an Earth-like environment around us. But that's and maybe then you could have famous people, souls, entities having vacations and entertainment and travel to different parts of this particular temporary reality that we create around ourselves as a function of not quite grasping the fact that we've become disincarnate and need to detach from the Earth environment. Well, that answers that question. So anything that is Earth-like, that is around us when we disincarnate, is purely a projection that we've created because we haven't quite detached from the Earth, or we haven't quite understood that we are now back into the energetic and are no longer incarnate. Okay, so next question. In light of what we have been told about Lucifer and made in emission or commission, perhaps there are some kinds of rules of behaviour, acceptable or unacceptable. Was Lucifer's action a real aberration and hardly ever seen or experienced or committed by others in the energetic? In other words, is this a really, really rare occurrence? Yes. Actually, withholding information isn't a rare occurrence, but in terms of when you're planning a way in which we can all, from an incarnate perspective, by the use of individualized free will, is rare. In general, we all see what everybody else sees. We all experience what everybody else experiences. And so to be led in a certain direction rather than being misled, I suppose you could call that being misled, is extremely rare. So the work that Lucifer did, or the entity that was Lucifer, in identifying all the positive sides of individualized free will and not really grasping the nettle and presenting the potentials for the negative sides, i.e. dropping down the frequencies, is very, very rare indeed. And to be honest, it just shows you the level of evolution, the evolutionary level that some of these individuals who are potentially in guiding situations actually have achieved themselves. And so, from my understanding, is that this level of direction is now no longer available to individuals who are working with those who are being incarnate in the physical universe. So bear in mind that the individuals that Lucifer worked with were all guiding and administering the way in which we can use the gross physical for accelerating our evolutionary progression, has led to the possibility of it being accelerated, drawn out, and that's a function of not understanding the full process of what could happen by introducing a new process. That process being individualized free will is no longer available. Basically, there has to be complete transparency in everything now, and no single opportunity for changing that transparency or not advising on a part of something that is supposed to be transparent. So in essence, that which Lucifer did in being economical with the truth, so to speak, about what individualized free will could allow us to achieve, or not achieve as the case may be, is or the processes that would occur that would eventually result in an accelerated evolution, but would present every incarnate aspect with the possibility of being addicted to the gross physical, i.e. karma, would need to be presented as well. So not presenting these possibilities is no longer an option, and this is a function, and this potential function of individualized free will that these entities had has been sort of removed, because it was identified that individualized free will, even on the energetic level, wasn't as pure as it could have been. Okay, so that's why it's a really, really rare occurrence. Okay. So the next part of this question, which isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. Is, please edit the above, but our group would like to know what it's like for us when we are getting to the energetic. In what ways is it like the physical? In what ways is it not like the physical? If there is recreation, schools and training, what is it like? I would suggest there's a bunch of books out there which describe, sometimes in very human terms, what it's like for us when we disincarnate. But also the Andalogs does that as well. And again, it does explain it in a sort of a human tense, but it does use the information and the knowledge that I've accrued through my own work as well to help give it depth from a different level of understanding based upon my knowledge, and working on and expanding from the knowledge of others as well. So it's really a case of recognizing that from a human perspective, it's total freedom. We are not constrained to anything. We are able to be anywhere and everywhere concurrently, should we wish to be. We are pretty much as omnipresent and as omniscient as we can be, from the perspective of our limited sentience, so to speak, even of our true energetic selves, based upon the fact that we are small units of source, and so we would have certain limitations based upon that level of omniscience and omnipresence, so to speak. So although we have the functions associated with those abilities, they are limited towards the level of sentience that we have. Okay. And so the human condition is it's like being in treacle, basically, whereas we have ultimate freedom energetically when we disincarnate. And we can create a human condition if you want to do. We can create a heaven, earth in heaven if you want to, but once you get there, you realise how unnecessary that is. And how long physical time, earth time, does one plan for an embodiment? I.e., how long do we spend planning for incarnation? Physical time doesn't exist, but if we used it as an inaccurate metric, then sometimes we can spend anything from decades to hours to seconds to centuries to millennia to plan. Some of these things are instantaneous, some of these things can take some time longer. Depends upon what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, and when those individuals we want to work with are available for us to work with, and when we're available for them to work with as well. Okay, so I hope that answers that question, and I know it doesn't go into some detail, but because I think people do want to experience things from a human perspective. But if you just consider yourself being everywhere all at once, and being able to experience everything all at once, and communicate with every other aspect or true energetic self all at once, and be in all these different locations all at once, what is changing the focus of the sentience? That's what it's like. And you just can't experience, you just can't understand it in the physical. It's like being totally connected all the time. It's like being able to access everything on the internet straight away in one go, including all the things that have been put there in the past, and including all the things that are going to be put there in what we call the future. Well, I hope that explains that. What I want to do now is to just go into this meditation we've talked about, by being in Satsanga together with God, or together with Source. So let's just close our eyes, sitting in a straight backed chair if we're not already in one. If you aren't in a straight backed chair, please find one. Feet flat on the ground, palms facing up, and resting gently on the upper thighs, eyes closed, but focused gently on the location of the third or spiritual eye, which is in between the eyebrows and above the bridge of the nose. And in the past we've used a lift. In the very long distant past we've used a lift, and I think it's worthwhile doing that now. So I want you to all visualize, or you can use a mentally spoken word to achieve the same thing. And what I mean by mentally spoken word is that you would actually state mentally what you're going to see in front of you. Like, for instance, if I say I visualize a lift in front of you, you would say, I am visualizing a lift in front of me. Use those sorts of words. So visualize a lift in front of you, or use your mentally spoken word to achieve the same thing. And to the right of the lift door is a lift call button. Press that lift call button and open the doors, and inside you'll see me. Now this lift is a bit special because everybody that's listening to this Satsanga now and is working with this meditation will also be in this lift with me. Everybody's in the lift concurrently, all together concurrently. And you're just another individual who's joining this method of getting towards being one with Source and being in Satsanga, together in God, or together with God or Source. So I'm going to press the button with the number 408 on it. This is the highest frequency associated with the multiverse. So our lift moves up from 0 to 1, and then 2, then accelerates to 4, and 6, and 8, and 10, accelerates again to 20, accelerates again to 40, 60, 80, 100, accelerates again to 150, 200, 250, 300, slowing down at 350, 370, 390, slowing down again at 400, slowing down again at 405, 406, 407, and finally coming to a standstill at 408. The 408th frequency is the highest frequency associated with the multiversal environment that is created as a function of the quarantining, if you want to call it that, or isolation of some part of the structure of the source. So this being the highest frequency, it's the easiest point at which the source can be accessed. And it can be accessed in lower frequencies, such as the 100th and even the Earth level, but that takes practice and lots of patience. With me in this lift now, we're on the 408th frequency. I'm just moving this particular lift with all of us in it to the absolute dead center of the universal environment that this particular frequency has created. Now I've moved us all together, and we've all wanted to be moved together. I'm going to start to dissolve this lift that we've used to get to the 408th frequency in a rapid way. And so I'll remove the roof, or dissolve the roof of the lift. I'll dissolve the front door of the lift. I'll dissolve the back of the lift. I'll dissolve the left-hand wall of the lift, and I'll dissolve the right-hand wall with the buttons on of the lift. And then I'll make the floor just transparent. So it's there, and we can see it's there, but it's simply transparent. Now there's many ways in which we can achieve communion or being in Satsanga with Source. But let's use one that I use quite frequently in the Traversing the Frequencies workshops, or when working with somebody individually, in those rare cases when we take them to a very high level within the structure of the multiverse as part of a healing process. So I request, or we all request, to be one with Source. And so the Source acknowledges us on this level and focuses its sentience to one point, or some part of its sentience to one point. This point becomes a large, pulsating, irradiating, rotating tube or vortex of energy that gets closer to us and larger as it gets closer to us. It looks like a huge tube or a vortex of energy. It's getting larger and larger and closer, until eventually it gets so close it engulfs us. It surrounds us. It's all around us. We are an individualized unit of sentience within the Source right now. But we can become closer to the Source by being one with the Source. And so we all together request the opportunity of being one with Source. We're always one with the Source, but we just don't realise it because we're in the lower frequencies. But being at this level, we can experience it whilst incarnate. So in requesting community with Source, the Source's energies pervade us. They move in between the cells of our physical bodies, our gross physical bodies, in between the gaps in between the atomic structure. It pervades the gaps in between the subatomic structure of the protons and neutrons and electrons. It pervades the gaps in between the leptons, the quarks, the stages and charm. It pervades the gaps in between the structure below the quarks. Then it pervades the gaps in between the structure below the lowest demarcation of structure, the anu. And then finally it pervades the gaps in between the anu themselves. So that there is no difference, no individualization of our sentient energy and Source's sentient energy. We are in communion with Source. We are still individualized, but that which is us can be with Source, any part of Source, concurrently, at the same time. So Source is one with us and we are one with Source, and so therefore we are the Source. We are in Satsanga. And so we'll stay here for a few minutes just to experience this Satsanga, knowing that if you go through this recording at a later date, you can re-experience the same thing. Everything that is experienced on this recording is experienced in the same event space. So if you experience it again in a year's time, you come back to this event space. So just allow yourself to dissolve. Feel your sentience being everywhere at once. Being everything, seeing everything, communicating with everything, knowing everything, being everything, concurrently. we'll just stay here for a couple more minutes. And so, having experienced this communion, this opportunity to be omnipresent and omniscient, fresh in the knowledge that we can achieve this at any time by going through this same process. Process is an event space that we can access at any time. Source starts to disassociate itself from us, and so it moves its sentience away from the gaps in between the inu, and it removes its sentience in between the gaps in between the structure above the inu. It continues to remove its sentience away from the structure below the leptons, and then it removes it from the gaps in between the leptons, which are the quarks, the strangers and charns themselves. And then it removes its sentience from in between the gaps in between the subatomic structure of the protons and neutrons and electrons. And it removes its sentience from between the atoms, and then removes its sentience from between the gaps in between the cells of our gross physical form. Until suddenly we are just simply surrounded by source sentience energy. We are simply surrounded by sentient energy that is source. And even then that sentience moves away from us, so we are separated out, standing on top of this transparent lift bottom, whilst the sentience and the focus of that sentience that was source, this rotating, pulsating, irradiating energy, this tube of or vortex of energy, sentient energy, starts to move further and further away, getting smaller and smaller as it does. Until simply we are sitting, or so say standing, on this transparent lift base that is my lift that we're all collectively using and part of. And so we need to come back down to the earth level, so I start the process of return by making the base of our lift opaque again and reconstructing the right hand wall with the buttons on. I'll then reconstruct the left hand wall, and then the back wall, then the front door, and then finally reconstruct the roof. I'll then press the button with the number 0 on it, and lift starts to descend from the 408th frequency down to the 407th. Then at 460 start to accelerate to 404, 402, 400, then it's faster at 380, 360, 340, 320, and at 300 it accelerates again to 250, 200, 150, 100, slowing down at 50 to 30, slowing down again to 20, slowing down again to 15 and 10, and at 5 it slows down again to 4 and 3 and 2 and 1, and finally comes to a standstill at the earth level of 0. So I start to open the door, we all move out of the lift, and so we're now in the room or the area that we started to listen to this Satsanga. And so we can slowly come back into that space, that room, and open our eyes and take a drink of water if you can, just to help ground you. And so this finishes this Satsanga for December 22nd, 2018, the final Satsanga of 2018, and it's the one closest to our Christmas celebrations. So remember, Christmas means we are together, Mass meaning together, which is Greek, Christ meaning Christland or purity, so together we are pure, so we can be pure together. So enjoy yourselves, enjoy your family, enjoy your work colleagues, enjoy your friends and peers, and send love to them all, knowing that they're all souls, they're all aspects or shards, doing the best they can to navigate through this incarnation so that they can evolve in the most efficient way as possible and work on navigating to the point where they can, at some point in their next future incarnations, remove the need to incarnate, for they'll evolve past that need, as you will. So thank you everybody for listening into the Satsanga. Thank you for doing the meditation. Thank you for your questions. It's a delight to be of service in this way, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the new year in January. So love to you all. Sources love to you all, Origins love to you all, and I wish you farewell and a wonderful Christmas and New Year.
Did you see the aliens in Crete?